You did everything right. You studied hard enough. You worked late enough. You said yes to the right opportunities and no to the things that would slow you down. And somewhere along the way, it worked. The title changed. The apartment got bigger. The number in your bank account stopped making you nervous. And now you're standing in your kitchen at 7 in the morning, coffee getting cold, and you feel nothing. Not happiness, not pride, not even relief. Just a quiet, formless ache that you don't have a name for. Because nobody gave you a name for it. Because this isn't supposed to happen to people who made it. You tell yourself it's fatigue. You tell yourself you just need a vacation. You tell yourself the feeling will pass once the next milestone lands, the next raise, the next launch, the next thing. But the next thing comes, and the ache is still there, sitting exactly where you left it. This is grief. You just weren't told you were allowed to feel it. There's a story Americans are raised on. It doesn't appear in any one book or classroom, but you absorbed it anyway. Through your parents' ambitions, through every movie where the underdog wins, through the way adults responded when you achieved something versus when you simply existed. The story goes like this: work hard enough, and your life will mean something. Struggle is temporary, success is permanent. And once you arrive, once you cross the threshold from striving to having, everything that hurt you on the way up will dissolve. You believe this. Most people do. Not because they're naive, but because the story is seductive in the way that all incomplete stories are. It contains enough truth to feel real. Hard work does open doors. Ambition does carry you places. The part it leaves out is what happens when you get there, and the person you had to become to make the journey. Here's what most people miss. The version of you that reached the top is not the version of you that started climbing. Somewhere in the ascent, you made trades. You traded time with people you loved for time with people who could advance your career. You traded the hobbies that made you feel like yourself for the habits that made you productive. You traded softness for efficiency. You told yourself these were temporary sacrifices. And then the temporary became permanent, and you forgot to grieve what you left behind. There's a specific kind of loss that doesn't get acknowledged because it doesn't look like loss from the outside. You stopped calling your college friends as often. Not because anything happened, just because your schedules diverged, and you were always the busier one, and eventually the calls became texts, and the texts became likes on each other's Instagram posts. Nobody died. Nobody had a fight. You just drifted, quietly and efficiently, like two ships that were always heading somewhere different. You stopped doing the thing you used to do that had no point. The drawing, the running, the guitar collecting dust in the corner of a room you barely enter. You didn't decide to stop. You just kept postponing it, and the postponement compounded until the thing that used to make you feel like yourself felt foreign, like something a younger, less serious version of you did before they understood how the world worked. You missed funerals. You missed weddings. Not all of them, just enough for you to carry the memory of the call you declined, the flight you didn't book, the person you told yourself you'd see later. Later has a way of never coming in the life of someone who is always moving forward. And underneath all of it, the quietest loss of all, you stopped knowing who you are when nobody needs anything from you. Your identity became so fused with what you do that the question, "Who are you?" now feels like it can only be answered with a job title. Strip the tile away, in a layoff, in a health crisis, in a Sunday afternoon with no agenda, and there's a disorienting emptiness where a self used to be. That emptiness is grief. It's grief for a life you didn't notice you were leaving behind. Your mind is very good at deferring pain. This is actually one of its most sophisticated functions, the ability to say, "not now," to an emotion that would slow you down. File it away. Keep moving. Deal with it later. The problem is that the body doesn't defer. It keeps a running tab. Researchers who study chronic stress have found something that sounds simple but carries enormous weight. The nervous system cannot distinguish between a threat to your physical safety and a threat to your sense of self. The pressure to perform, the fear of being found out, the low-grade hum of never feeling like enough, Your body processes all of it the same way it would process standing in traffic. Cortisol, elevated heart rate, muscles braced for impact. Successful people often describe a baseline tension they can't locate. They sleep enough but never feel rested. They exercise, they eat well, they do the things the wellness industry tells them to do. And yet there's a tightness that doesn't leave, a jaw they clench in the night. A shallow quality to their breathing that they only notice when someone points it out. That tension is years of deferred grief stored in the body. You ran so fast for so long that your nervous system forgot how to stop bracing. And now that the race is won, or at least paused, the body doesn't know what to do with the stillness. So it keeps bracing anyway, out of habit, because stopping felt dangerous for so long that safety itself became suspicious. There's a reason high-achieving people often have their first serious breakdown not during the crisis, but after it. Not while they're grinding toward the goal, but in the weeks following the finish line. The body waited until you had permission to feel, and then, all at once, it handed you the tab. Other cultures have rituals for grief. They have wailing rooms and mourning periods and ceremonies that mark the end of something, that give a community permission to witness a person's loss and say, "This mattered, and your pain is real." American success culture has almost none of this. What it has instead is a relentless forward orientation. The cure for loss is productivity. The cure for sadness is optimization. If you're struggling, you need a better morning routine, a clearer set of goals, a more aggressive system for managing your time. The very act of pausing to grieve, to something important to me on the way to where I am, is coded as weakness, as navel-gazing, as a luxury for people who haven't earned the right to complain, so you don't talk about it. Not at work, because vulnerability in professional settings still carries risk in ways that are hard to articulate but very easy to feel. Not with friends, because most of your friends are also high-achieving, also quietly struggling, and the unspoken agreement in the room is that everyone is fine. Not with your family, because they're proud of you, and disappointing their pride by admitting you're sad feels like a betrayal of everything they sacrificed to give you the chance you took. And so the grief stays private. It circulates inside you with nowhere to go. And it starts to express itself in the ways that unexpressed grief always does, through irritability, through numbness, through an inability to be present in a moment without your mind running calculations about the next one, through drinking a little more than you used to, through a vague but persistent sense that something is wrong with you, specifically because everyone else seems to be handling this just fine. They're not. You just can't see their tab. When you tell someone you've been successful, they ask how you did it. They want the strategy, the habits, the mindset shifts. They want to know what you gave up so they can decide if they're willing to give up the same things. Nobody asks what you miss. Nobody asks about the version of yourself that existed before the ambition took hold, the one who had time to be bored, to be curious without a goal attached to the curiosity, to love people without calculating what the relationship costs you in energy and hours. Nobody asks whether you actually wanted this specific life, or whether you wanted the feeling you thought this life would bring, and those turned out to be two entirely different things. The answer to that last question is something a lot of successful people can't afford to sit with. Because if the answer is, "I wanted the feeling, not this particular life," then a reckoning is required. Not necessarily a dramatic one, not a resignation letter and a one-way ticket to somewhere with better light, but a reckoning nonetheless. An honest look at what you've been chasing, what it's cost you, and whether the trade still makes sense now that you can see the full ledger. That reckoning is the beginning of the grief, and grief, real grief, not the suppressed, optimized, deferred version, is not a problem to solve. It's a process to survive. It moves through you in its own time, on its own terms. You can't hustle through it. You can't build a system around it. You have to sit down, which is the one thing high achievers are least equipped to do, and let it come. Here's the truth that nobody puts in the productivity books. You can achieve your way to a life that looks exactly like the one you planned, and still find yourself mourning a life you didn't know you were losing. The two things coexist, the pride and the grief, the accomplishment and the ache. The person you became and the person you were before you learned how to become someone. That ache is not a malfunction. It's not ingratitude, and it's not weakness, and it's not a sign that you made the wrong choices. It's what happens when a human being moves fast enough and long enough that they outrun their own emotional life. And then one quiet morning, standing in a kitchen they worked hard to afford, they finally stop running long enough to notice the distance. You can't go back. Nobody can. But you can stop calling the ache nothing. You can stop performing fine for people who are also performing fine. You can let the thing that died on the way up have a name and a moment and a small, honest place in the story of how you got here. Not because it changes anything, because it was real. And you were there, and that should be enough to say out loud.